Today we're going to learn about factoring polynomials. Well, factoring is the inverse of multiplication. So let's have an example of how we multiply. So let's have 5 parentheses x plus 2. And we all know that we need to distribute that. And so it's 5x plus 10. Well, factoring is looking at this binomial and taking the greatest common factor in both terms. So for us to factor this out, we should get the greatest common factor between 5x and 10 is 5. And if I take out that 5, from here, what is left is x inside. And if I take out on this term, if I take out the 5 as an inverse of multiplication, then I'm going to divide. So 10 divided by 5 will be a positive 2. To check if our answer is right, all we need to do is to go back and multiply. So 5 times x is 5x. 5 times 2 is positive 10. So for our next example, we are going to factor out this trinomial. And the way you handle this is you're going to look at the coefficients, the numerical coefficients, and you're going to look at the variables, the literal coefficients. So let's look at our numerical coefficients. On here I have 5, here I have 30, and here I have 15. This is telling me that the greatest common factor is 5. Looking at the literal coefficients, I have x to the 6th, x to the 5th, and x to the 3rd. The biggest common factor is x to the 3rd. So now, let us begin our dividing process or our factoring process. If I take out 5 x to the 3rd from 5 x to the 6th, what is left is x to the 3rd. If I take out 5 from 30, I'm going to have a positive 6. If I take out x to the 3rd from x to the 5th, I will have x to the 2nd. If I divide 15x to the 3rd by 5x to the 3rd, I will have a positive 3. Once again, the way you see if your answer is right is if you distribute them back, and you're going to get the same thing. This kind of factoring is called the factoring by common monomial factor. So again, this is example 1, example 2, example 3. We are now going to go to our example 3, and we are going to apply the common monomial factor. So once again, we scan this with our eyes and we think of the greatest common factor. There's a negative 3, a positive 12, and a negative 18. There is no literal coefficients here. And so I am thinking that the greatest common factor here is a 3. So if I take out the 3, this is going to become negative x squared. Positive 12x divided by 3 is a positive 4x. Negative 18 divided by positive 3 is a negative 6. So that is our factored form using the common monomial factor of 3. However, if you look at this, there is really kind of 2 ways to do this. I can actually take out negative 3 if I want to. So let's try doing the factoring by taking out the negative 3. So if I take out the negative, so this is an OR. If I take out the negative 3, what will change is the sign. So this is going to be an x squared, positive. If I take out the negative 3 from here, if I divide 12x by a negative 3, it's going to be a negative 4x. And again, to confirm that, you can go back and multiply negative 3 times a negative 4 is a positive 12. And then negative 18 divided by negative 3 is a positive 6. These two are the same. Example number 4 is this binomial. And you heard me correctly. This is a binomial. This is one term and this is another term. Now, if you would notice, the y minus 3 is inside the parentheses. It's taken as 1. And there's also y minus 3 here. So looking at this, the y minus 3 is what you need to take out. That's the greatest common factor. So let's try that. If I take out y minus 3 from this term, you know that this is left inside. So that's 2y. If I take out y minus 3 from here, from this term, the positive 5 stays inside. So now this is the completed factor. Example number 5 has 4 terms. So this is something different. Usually when it's 4 terms, we are going to use the factoring by what we call grouping. So we're going to group these two together. We're going to group these two together and we're going to start factoring them separately. So let's factor this out first. I have a to the third minus 5a squared. The only thing common, the only factor common to both is a squared. And by the way, a squared because that's the biggest common factor. So let's take that out. So a squared stays out. If I divide a to the third by a squared, a stays inside. If I divide negative 5a squared by a squared, negative 5 stays inside. So again, to confirm, if you wanted to, you can multiply and the answer will be this. So let's look at this one. I'm looking at 6a and I'm looking at negative 30. I'm kind of thinking that my factor here is positive 6. And if that's positive 6, then I can take out 6a divided by 6 is an a. Negative 30 divided by 6 is negative 5. And that's it. Those are my factors. But wait, are you seeing what I'm seeing? A minus 5 and a minus 5 are common to both terms, like this one right here. So let's further simplify, or let's further factor out. I'm going to take out a minus 5 from both because that's their biggest common factor. On this term, if I divide this term by a minus 5, this will be left. So a squared is left. And on this term, if I take out my a minus 5 because it's already there, what is left is positive 6. This is the completed factor form. Okay, now next example is another polynomial that has 4 terms. So most likely we're going to use the factoring by grouping. So again, this is what I'm going to group. I'm looking at 4x to the fourth minus 2x to the third. For their numerical coefficients, I know that my biggest common factor is a 2. For the literal coefficients, I know that x to the third is my biggest common factor. So looking at this first term, if I divide this by 2x to the third, I know that for my numerical coefficient, I'm going to be left with a 2. My literal, I will have an x. For this one, notice that I'm dividing it exactly by itself. And we learned this before. It's a negative 1. So that is it for these 2 terms. Let us now go to this one. I'm seeing a negative 6x and a positive 3. I would take a shot here. I'm going to say that the greatest common factor here is a negative 3. And then what's left inside, if I divide this by a negative 3, is a positive 2x. And then positive 3 divided by negative 3 is a negative 1. So I'm looking at this binomial again, and it has a common term, I'm sorry, common factor of 2x minus 1. So I'm taking that out. So if I take it out, it's gonna look like this. 2x minus 1 outside, and on this term, if I divide this by 2x minus 1 or take this out, this will be left. So 2x to the third. If I take out from here 2x minus 1, negative 3 is left. This now is the completed factor form.